All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Drew Smith. I'm the CEO and founder of Attributa. We're a consulting firm that specializes in marketing measurement and attribution. And today we're going to be talking about what I like to refer to as the three-headed monster of marketing measurement, which is attribution, incrementality testing, and media mix modeling. Now, before we get into this too much, who here has heard of attribution? Yeah, okay. Who here has heard of incrementality testing? Okay, who here has heard of media mix modeling? Okay, all right, so we're gonna do a lot of education today. We are not gonna be talking much about tools. I mean, we'll mention some tools, but this is not a conversation about tools. This is a conversation about what these things are, what they're good at, what they're not good at, and how to figure out which one of these or which ones of these, because you might want more than one of these, is right for your organization. So we're going to talk a lot about the differences between these different methodologies. We're going to talk about their unique strengths and what makes them successful. We're going to talk about some key considerations for these methodologies. And then we're going to talk about how to find what's a best fit for your organization. Because one thing I can tell you is that these methodologies are not right for every single organization. Some organizations have different needs. So why we're having this conversation is because there's a lot of information in the marketplace about these different methodologies. And the vast majority of the information about these methodologies is put out by the software vendors. It's put out by the vendors that make the tools. And so what do we all know about software vendors that are providing information about the tools they make? There's going to be at least a little bit of bias in there, right? Because they're marketing to you, they're selling to you, right? So what we want to do is we want to take the bias out of this informational session and have it be completely neutral, right? Now, me, again, I mentioned I'm Drew. I'm the CEO and founder of Attributa. I've been in marketing now for well over 20 years. I'm old. And I've been doing marketing reporting and analysis for 12 plus years. I've done all different types of marketing measurement methodologies, and I've failed a lot, and that's why I'm at where I'm at now. We have a lot of clients of all different sizes and shapes. Mostly what we work with is B2B SaaS companies, but we do have like some B2B hardware companies. We work with a company that sells chickens. We also work with new home builders. So we work with organizations that are all across the spectrum, and they all have different needs. Now, one of the things that, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, is one of the things that we do is we do consulting around all three of these methodologies. So when I talk about removing bias, we don't have a favorite because we can consult on any of these. So if there's a bias in this room, it's I want you to pick one of them, but I don't care which one you pick because I'm good with any of them, right? So that's kind of our perspective, is that we're trying to keep this unbiased and really focusing on what's real about these different methodologies. Again, methodology agnostic. Our goal isn't to push one specific methodology, it's to help you find what's the best fit for your organization. And ultimately, the right measurement strategy is really the one that's going to help you make improvements and do better marketing and ultimately win more deals, right? So let's talk about attribution. So there's really two different methodologies within attribution. You've got single touch and you've got multi-touch. And actually, real quick, before we get into this, if anybody has questions, this is a small group. So if we have questions, you don't have to save it for the end. Just raise your hand and fire away, and we'll answer questions as they come up. If we had a larger group, we'd save them for the end, but that's not this. We'll just make this conversational today. So within attribution, we've got single touch attribution and multi-touch attribution. Single touch attribution is what most people are using If you're using any attribution at all, you're most likely using single touch attribution. It's your first touch attribution and your last touch attribution, right? Now, last touch attribution, everybody focuses on last touch, but I always say last touch in regards to what? Because last touch could be last touch prior to MQL, it could be last touch prior to opportunity creation, it could be last touch prior to opportunity win, it could be last touch before anything happens, right? So when we talk about last touch, we have to be very specific in last touch prior to what. Now, multi-touch is where you get into, we track every interaction throughout the entire buying process. Every interaction turns into a touch point. And then this is where you distribute credit with single touch attribution if you have an opportunity, because we're only measuring one touch, either the first touch or the last touch prior to something, 100% of the opportunity credit goes to whatever that touch point is. With multi-touch, you distribute that credit across multiple touch points. So what this means, and I'm going to use the whiteboard for this because I love whiteboarding, and I think that this is a really good illustration of how multi-touch distributes credit. So let's get this here. Here we go. So multi-touch. You have an opportunity, and that opportunity is a pie, right? With multi-touch, with single touch, the entire pie goes to either the first touch or the last touch, right? With multi-touch, you're taking the pie and allocating pie pieces to each of the touch points throughout that journey. And when you allocate these pie pieces, this pie piece might be worth 5%, this pie piece might be worth 10%, and so on. So you essentially carve up the opportunity into pie pieces and distribute the value to each of those different touch points. Now, we kind of already got into this. So now within multi-touch, you have multiple different attribution models. This is where you've got things like, I'm sure most of you have heard of U-shaped and W-shaped and linear and time decay and all of these different models that exist. One of the things that really trips people up when they start getting into multi-touch attribution is figuring out which attribution model is right for me and my organization. And that is not the right way to look at attribution models. Attribution models are tools. The way that I kind of explain attribution models is attribution models, it's like going to the hardware store and buying a set of wrenches. Everybody needs a set of wrenches for your house, right? Because we have projects. And when you go buy your set of wrenches at the hardware store, do you go home and pick your favorite wrench and this is the wrench for my house and throw the rest of them out? No, you don't, because each wrench is a different size and it fits a different use case, right? That's how you should think about attribution models, U-shaped, W-shaped, all that stuff, because they answer different questions. So the attribution model should be aligned to the report itself and the question that the report is asking, as opposed to the attribution model for my organization. Because there's some attribution models, and this is where I'm going to use a quick example of a tool. Marketo Measure is an example of a tool that does multi-touch attribution, and it has a W-shaped model. And the W-shaped model looks like this. You have your W, and it starts with first touch, it goes to lead creation, and then it goes to opportunity creation. It stops counting touch points once the opportunity's been created. Now, it also has a full path model that adds on here and goes all the way to closed. Now, if I'm measuring how marketing influenced opportunities, the full path model includes touch points that happened after the opportunity was created. So I would never use the full path model to measure how marketing is influencing opportunity creation, right? So that's just a really practical example of how attribution models should be used at the report level and based on the question that you're asking of the report versus as an organization, okay? So let's talk about what attribution's good at. This is where we get into a lot of the, kind of biased opinions that are out in the marketplace, because depending on who you talk to, some people will tell you attribution is not good at anything. But it is good at things. And here's what it's good at. It's good at correlation insights. Correlation insights means that what you can do with attribution is you can see the relationship between specific marketing tactics or channels and pipeline or bookings and sales, to show what's associated with success. You can see, wait, this one piece of content is associated to 100 opportunities. That's probably a pretty positive indicator about that one piece of content, particularly if any other piece of content is only associated with a maximum of 25 opportunities. You know you've got a piece of content that is performing well, right? Funnel stage context. So because we create a touch point for every interaction throughout that buying process, what you get is you understand where in the buyer journey this touch point is taking place, because all touch points get date and time stamped. So you know, okay, this happened right when it MQL'd. This happened somewhere in between MQL and opportunity creation. You know where this thing happened. With this funnel stage context, what I like to, the kind of analogy that I like to use to talk about attribution, particularly multi-touch is like telling a story about how an opportunity or a deal came to be. Every touch point is a chapter. The person that had the touch point is a character in our story. And all you're doing with attribution is trying to figure out all the chapters, as many chapters and characters as we can identify as part of that story. You get historical intelligence. So you get this massive historical record of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And this can help inform future strategy decisions. One of the things that's important to talk about when we talk about this historical intelligence is we talk about what worked and what hasn't worked. So everybody wants to know what works, so we can do more of what works, right? And in order to do more of what works, we have to do less of what doesn't work, right? Because you can't just add budget from nowhere. How many of us in marketing are getting bigger budgets? We got one in the back. We got two in the back, one going maybe a little bit. Most marketers are like, well, I'm sorry, for year number 12 in a row, you're going to have to do more with less. So in order to do more with less, we have to know what doesn't work, right? Loss analysis. So attribution's really good at loss analysis. I'm going to give you a really practical example. So several years ago, I was working with a customer that was on Marketo Measure, and they had launched a new paid search campaign. And this paid search campaign was a campaign that drove to a request a demo page. And that demo page had, an image and content and all that stuff for why you should request a demo, right? And after we launched this campaign, 30 days after we launched this campaign, we did a check-in to see how many opportunities had been created so far from this campaign. It's a request a demo. Like, we should have some opportunities within 30 days, right? This is people saying, I want to buy your product. So we looked, and not a single opportunity was created. Not one. Now, because we had attribution in place and we'd done a lot of other data engineering, we were able to track back to the people that clicked on that link, filled out that form, regardless of where they were in the funnel, regardless of whether it was a first touch or whatever. We were able to figure out who these people were. We were able to match that to their status in the funnel. 100% of them had been disqualified, not recycled, disqualified. And we were able to match them to a disqualification reason, that they were not an ICP fit. These people that had filled out this form were like mom and pop shops, like flower stores and bakeries and hair salons and stuff like this. And this particular client of mine didn't sell to those types of organizations. So we have a massive problem with this campaign, right? Now, because we have attribution in place, it took us 15 minutes to do all of this assessment, right? And what we found is that the primary culprit was the image on the landing page. The image was of a mom and pop shop. So everybody that clicked the link, if you were a mom and pop shop, you saw the image and you go, this looks like me. I'm going to fill out the form. But to people who aren't a mom and pop shop, the people that they actually wanted to sell to, they said, this image doesn't look like me. This solution's not for me, it's for mom and pop shops, so I'm not going to fill out the form. So we were able to go fix the ad, relaunch it, and then track it again, and sure enough, after we fixed it, they were actually seeing some opportunities from this. Attribution made this possible, and it not only made it possible, but it made it super easy to get to that, right? One other thing that when we talk about what isn't working that's really important is it's not important to just know what doesn't work. It's important to know why it isn't working. Because just because something isn't working doesn't mean we just stop doing it. We very easily could have just turned off that ad entirely and never fixed it, and then never got the opportunities that were generated after we fixed the ad, right? So you have to understand why things don't work. Complete journey visibility is another superpower of attribution because, again, it visualizes every single touch point as a unique record. So you can go investigate individual records to see what's happening as people engage with your marketing. Granular data. Attribution, among these three methodologies, attribution gives you the most granular data of all of them. With the right tooling, you can get down to keyword level insights. You can get down to, obviously, campaign level insights. But you can get really, really granular with this data.
So let's talk about what attribution's not good at, because it's not good at everything. It has some weaknesses. So what are the considerations that you need to consider if you're looking at attribution? First and foremost is correlation does not equal causation. We all know that from science. Just because that one piece of content is correlated with 100 opportunities does not mean that piece of content created those opportunities. It means it's related to them, associated to them, influenced them, but it didn't cause them. Maybe, but attribution doesn't tell us that. Brand effect. If you've heard anybody in the marketplace talking smack about attribution, brand effect is the one that they usually hone in on. And correlation does not equal causation. This comes up a lot when you talk about display ads. Does everybody know what the average click-through rate on a display ad is? It's about 0.2%. It's nothing. Attribution only works when people click, because it needs to create a measurable touch point. If people don't click, it's invisible to attribution. So if you're doing a lot of display advertising, attribution's going to have a big blind spot for you. Now, there are some attribution platforms and some attribution tools that allow you to do things like impressions and tracking impressions as touch points. Personally, I hate that because tracking impressions as touch points makes two critical assumptions. Assumption number one is that an ad served is an ad seen. How many ads do you get served on a day that you don't even know you got served? A lot. Number two, an ad seen is an ad remembered. How many ads do you see in a day? How many do you remember seeing? Yeah, not many. Perfect example of why I hate impression tracking. So this was back in a few months ago. I was on the road at an event, and I happened to be in my hotel room watching Nate Bargatze skits on YouTube. I think he's hilarious. That was how I was spending my evening. Exciting, thrilling evening, I know. And while I'm watching Nate Bargatze, an ad pops up. And I use that time to walk away from my computer to go do some stuff. And so all I could do was hear the ad. And the ad was in Español. Hablo un poquito español, pero I don't understand it really well. So this ad is speaking to me in Spanish, a language that I barely understand. I have no idea what this ad was for. Now, if I had magically gone to that website within whatever attribution your impression tracking uses, it would have given credit to this ad that I didn't even understand. That's why impression tracking sucks, right? It's not very good. Attribution is not predictive in itself. Now, attribution data can be used to create predictive modeling, but attribution itself doesn't do anything predictive, okay? Psychological blind spot. We already know that correlation does not equal causation. We also don't know psychologically why somebody bought from us using attribution. We can tell all the things that they engaged with on the journey, but we can't tell if one of those was the aha moment, right? We just can't. So you cannot get psychological causation using attribution. It just doesn't work. Now, let's talk about incrementality testing. Quick show of hands, who has heard of incrementality testing? Okay, we got one in the back. All right, cool. So incrementality testing is, it's not new, but it's become a much bigger thing in B2B over the last couple of years. Basically, what it does is it applies a scientific method to testing marketing to figure out what marketing works. So essentially, what you're doing is you are creating scientific experiments. You're designing scientific experiments to test marketing. When you want to understand statistical causation, now I'm using statistical causation differently than psychological causation, right? Statistical causation, incrementality testing is the way to go. Because what it does is, and we're going to get into this in just a minute, but what you do is you design your experiment. And you create a control group and a test group. Just like we all learn the scientific method at some point in time, right? You have a control group who's not going to get targeted with this marketing. And then you have a test group that is going to get targeted with this marketing. Once you've designed your experiment, you have to execute your campaign. And then what you do is you measure the lift for those people that actually received the messaging, the marketing that you put out to them. With incrementality testing, one of the most important part of incrementality testing, and to get this right, is how you design your experiment. Because if you design your experiment wrong, and then or poorly, and then you execute your campaign, your lift is going to be off. So what do I mean by this? You have to create your control groups and your test groups so that the only variable between those two is the marketing that the test group is going to be getting. If there's any other variables, well, there goes your statistical causation, because it could be any one of the other variables that's actually causing the lift, right? So you have to be very, very diligent in how you structure your experiment. One of the things you cannot do to get to good testing with incrementality is say, well, those mom and pop shops, the flower shops, the hair salons, we don't sell to them. That's going to be our control group. But the people we sell to is going to be our test group. It doesn't work like that. Because if you can't sell to somebody, you cannot test if they're going to buy from you. So you've got to be very careful with how you design your experiments. Now, what are the superpowers for incrementality testing? Again, statistical causation. This is where incrementality testing really, really, really shines. You will know without a shadow of a doubt that this particular marketing thing caused these opportunities or wins to happen. Statistically, not psychologically, statistically. Now, what I mean by that is it eliminates the unsurety lack of surety around what if I didn't do this advertising at all? Because if I didn't do this advertising at all, it's already represented by your control group, right? When we talk about attribution, we don't know if the deal would have happened without any of the stuff that pops up in marketing attribution, because we don't have a control group to test against, right? Now, another thing that is really, really powerful with incrementality testing is the brand effect. So this is what we were talking about a minute ago. Incrementality testing does not require a direct touch point to understand how it is influencing opportunities or wins. What it requires is comparing a group that gets the advertising against a group that doesn't get the advertising. Now, there's a lot of things that you can compare, a lot of metrics and KPIs you can compare. You can compare touch points, like from attribution. Now, touch points for brand effect is never going to show up under a brand effect channel, because it's not going to show up under a billboard channel, because we don't know that they saw the billboard, right? It's going to show up under channels like organic search or direct traffic to your website. So you can measure the lift in just touch points to the people that got the advertising versus the people that didn't get the advertising. If the lift is larger, well, you know that your experiment was successful. If the lift is the same, it really didn't have a positive effect at all. And if the lift is lower than the control group, it actually had a negative effect, right? So you can use that brand effect without generating actual touch points. Now, you don't even need to use touch points to measure that, though, because you can also measure things like opportunities. If after running my experiment, my test group has 25% more opportunities than my control group, and the only difference is one of them got advertising and one of them didn't, well, what caused that 25% lift? The advertising, right? Another great thing about incrementality testing is geographic precision. Incrementality testing, if you've ever heard of geolift analysis, or geographical lift analysis, that's incrementality testing. That's where you take and you say, okay, we are going to run this ad in California, but we are not going to run this ad in New York. And let's compare the results. It can be we're going to run this ad to our ICP in Australia, but we're not going to run this ad to our ICP in Europe. It can be states, it can be countries, it can be geographic regions. As long as the advertising is the only variable between those two, then you're good. So it really wouldn't work if you had a scenario where, well, in Australia, we have 3 SDRs also doing an outbound campaign, and in Europe, we have no SDRs doing an outbound campaign. Well, what had the impact? Was it the marketing or the SDRs? Can't tell, because we got multiple variables, right? So you have to have all other variables excluded. But if you do that well and you do that right, geographic lift testing is one of the most tried and true methods of incrementality testing and lift analysis that can be done. It's a fantastic methodology to understand marketing's impact. Now, here's our considerations. Number 1, the control group requirement. We talked about that. In B2B, this is usually a really terrifying thing because you essentially have to go to like a VP of sales or a CFO and say, hey, a certain portion of our ICP, we're just going to not market to them. And no, that doesn't mean that you get to just like spam call them more than the groups that are getting advertising. You essentially have to burn part of your ICP as your control group to do your testing. That is a really tough sell in B2B, particularly if you have a small ICP. We're talking about sample size, right? Scale limitations. Incrementality testing doesn't do well with really, really broad tactics where you can't really closely define a control group. So for example, paid search, like keywords. Now, in some platforms, you might be able to restrict your paid search ads to only pop up in certain like geographies, in which case you can do geo-lift testing with regards to paid search. But if you don't have the ability in the platform or the ability from ICP limitations to restrict where those keywords are going to show up, you don't have a control group anymore, right? Similar thing to like large conferences or trade shows. Can you do incrementality testing for Mopsapalooza if you're a sponsor? You can do QR codes, you can do special offers, you can do stuff like that, yes. But like you can't do geo-lift. Where are you from? Salt Lake. Ali, where are you from? Netherlands. We can't do geo-lift testing right there because we've got so many people from so many different places. I know people from India, I know people from Romania, I know people are here from the UK, I know people are here from all over the US. How do you do geo-lift testing with a conference or a trade show that attracts people from all over the world and you're not in control of that? It's incredibly difficult to do that. Now, you could do some incrementality testing with like account groups and stuff like that. You can create your account group that attended and an account group that didn't attend, but you also didn't design the control group, so they may not be the exact same profile of firmographic information. So it gets a little muddy, right? It doesn't mean you can't, it just means it's not as precise as when you have that total control over your control group and your test group. Granularity boundaries, so incrementality testing can get pretty granular. But again, it's going to depend on your sample sizes. So things like keyword level insights, unless you're a massive organization that's bidding on keywords that are really, really common, and you've got tons of people searching for those, you're probably not going to have a sample size large enough to get down to keyword level insights. It's going to be very difficult. Statistical expertise. It requires a lot more statistical knowledge than attribution. As I'm sure you can kind of understand from the explanation here. You have to design your experiments. Most marketing ops folks I know haven't designed experiments since high school or whenever you learn scientific method, junior high. We do A/B testing, but incrementality testing is not A/B testing. It's A/B testing on steroids, right? So we're not really, most marketing ops folks aren't used to doing incrementality testing. So from an accessibility standpoint, it's nowhere near as accessible as marketing attribution. Now, what I will tell you is this. When we talk about accessibility, there are a lot of people in the market that will tell you that accessibility does not matter because the statistical causation for incrementality testing is so strong that accessibility does not matter. And my counter to that is, yeah, if you don't understand the reports and the data that you're using to make informed decisions, how do you make informed decisions? Accessibility matters. If you design your experiments incorrectly because you haven't done it before, accessibility matters, right? So accessibility does matter. Incrementality testing is also historical in nature. It does not predict future performance. Now, incrementality testing, the data created by incrementality testing can be used for predictive models. Kind of like what we said with attribution. The data from attribution can be used to inform predictive models, but it is not predictive in and of itself, right? There's a really, really cool software platform out there that does media mix modeling, and we're going to talk about what that is in just a moment. It's called Recast. Guess what Recast also has as part of their platform? Incrementality testing. Because the statistical causation is really, really strong, so they use the incrementality testing results to power their media mix models. So you can use this to be predictive, but it is not predictive in and of itself. It also has the same psychological blind spot of attribution. Now, it has really, really strong statistical causation, but it does not have psychological causation. And let me give you an example of this. So let's say I work for Company A, and Company A is a customer of brand X, okay? And I'm at Company A, and I leave Company A, and I go to Company B. And Company B is a target account for brand X. And Company B is getting a ton of advertising around brand X. Suddenly, I show up on the scene as a former customer who is a huge supporter of brand X, and I immediately go fill out a demo request form so I can get in touch with my new sales rep now that I'm with a new organization. What's incrementality going to tell me caused that deal? The ads. It was clearly the ads. No, it's because I'm a former customer, and I'm a huge supporter. The ads did nothing. I was going to buy no matter what. So, what's that? Exactly, yes. So while we do say that this is the gold standard for statistical causation, and it is, psychological blind spots are still present. Now, does that mean that you cannot control for that within your incrementality testing? It would be really tough. You probably could, but you would need some sort of a data point in your CRM that says something about any kind of like historical relationships. Yeah, I was a former customer, or, my brother's your VP of sales, things like that. If you have those data points, if you collect those data points, you might be able to use those in incrementality testing to basically exclude those from your sample, right? Because those are outliers, but they're not in there, right? Most of us don't capture that stuff. We just don't. So it does have a psychological blind spot. Now, we talked about, and it's not on this slide, but we talked a little bit about sample sizes. All right, we're good on time. We talked a little bit about sample sizes. Because this is using the scientific method and scientific experiments, if you have a sample size of 10, you do not have a sample size large enough to draw any conclusions. You need large, large sample sizes. Now, what I cannot tell you is what is the minimum threshold for a sample size, because it's going to vary. It's going to vary based on a lot of different criteria. But this is one of the reasons why incrementality testing has really never absolutely taken off in B2B, is because you do need to have the right sample sizes. Now, it's getting better. The math behind all this stuff is getting better, and we're reducing those minimum sample sizes, but you still have to have a minimum threshold of sample sizes. So there's no magic number. There isn't, unfortunately. I wish there was, but there isn't. But you do have to have a representative sample size. Yes?
When you're doing, for example, like the pre-test considerations, and you're saying like, okay, here's how many people I'm expecting to run through this test. This is the list I would need to know to have like a static result. But then you run the test, you don't get that expected list. How do you decide between continuing the experiment in order to get a large sample size, or
Yeah.
following it and saying, well, we didn't get the list, so it's like.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because a lot of that comes into the uniqueness of your particular business, right? So let's say the lift that you're trying to optimize for is opportunities. And you're in a business where you are super transactional, super high volume opportunities. You don't need to wait a lot of time to understand whether or not your experiment was successful or not, because you're high volume, high velocity business. Now, if you are a low volume, slower velocity business, you need to wait longer, because, we all work in marketing ops. Raise your hand, how many people have run a campaign and then had some VP of sales or somebody come to you like 3 days later and go, how many opportunities we got from that campaign? We've all had that happen. And you're like, dude, we just launched it. Give me a break. Give me some time. This doesn't happen. So the longer your sales cycles are, the longer you have to wait for your experiment to see if we're actually getting the results we expect. So it's really important to understand when you're designing your experiment, what is the KPI that we're optimizing for, and what is the typical time lag to go from marketing campaign to that KPI. If however long that is, that's the start of when you can start evaluating your experiment. Because that's the typical time frame. Sometimes it takes longer, right? So that's the start of when you can start understanding if your experiment was successful. We get questions all the time from folks that's like, well, how do I speed that up? Speed up your sales cycle. That's it. There's no other way to speed it up. Speed up your sales cycle. Yes?
With that gray area for attribution, the longer you go, the fuzzier it gets, how do you go about best defining that? Is it looking at historical conversions and taking that baseline, or do you have a specific calculation so we can say, okay, for this audience we will use past 6 months, for this one we'll use a year and a half?
Yeah, you have to understand the historical benchmarks. Yeah, so a great example is I worked for an organization, not worked for, but worked with, they were a client of mine. They had 2 distinct audiences. One of them was application developers. There's 1 million of them. And they're small companies to start out with, and they move quickly, right? Startups always move quickly. The other audience they have is the top 100 banks in the world. Banks move at approximately the same rate as glaciers. So ultimately, when we were designing our measurement methodologies for those 2 audiences, we had to completely separate them and say, for this audience, this is our time frame that we're going to allow, and for this audience, this is our time frame that we're going to allow, because they're so vastly different. So you have to understand your audience and do the benchmarking to understand how long that takes. Because you can't, because every org's different, and even within an org, the audiences can be vastly different. That's another thing that is always a challenge when we talk about marketing measurement is everybody is really concerned about the data being perfect. We're making data-driven decisions here. We are deciding where to spend our money and where not to spend our money. This needs to be perfect. No. It doesn't need to be perfect because it never will be perfect. Perfection in data is a fool's errand. You cannot get perfect in data. It doesn't happen. It's kind of like the analogy that I always use for this, and you're going to have to bear with me being a super nerd, is the speed of light. The speed of light is the international speed limit. Why is it the international speed limit? Because as you get closer to the speed of light, time slows down. And speed is a measure of distance traveled over time. So because time slows down, you travel less distance over time. So you can never actually achieve the speed of light because of these constraints. You can never achieve data perfection because the closer you get to data perfection, the harder it is to make every next incremental improvement, and the value you get from it is minuscule. So the goal is not to get data perfection. The goal is to get data to be accurate enough that we're confident in our decisions. Okay, now let's talk about media mix modeling. Who has heard of media mix modeling? Okay, a lot more people have. Yeah, so media mix modeling traces its heritage back to, if I remember correctly, like the 1960s. I believe it was Procter & Gamble invented media mix modeling because they were spending a crap ton of money on marketing. And back then in the 60s, we didn't have digital touch points. The internet didn't exist, so we couldn't track all the fun stuff we can track today. All they had was radio, TV, billboards out of home, all the traditional advertising. Well, how do you measure those without touch points and digital tracking? Media mix modeling is what they came up with. Media mix modeling basically uses advanced statistical techniques to analyze the impact of things that do not generate a measurable engagement touch point. They do not. Well, in some cases they might. You can use things like digital touch points as part of a media mix model. But ultimately, what it does is it helps understand how that advertising through your different marketing channels is having an impact on opportunities or wins, business outcomes. Now, the interesting thing about media mix modeling is that fundamentally, as opposed to what we were talking about with attribution and incrementality testing, it is fundamentally forward-facing. When you use media mix modeling, you are not looking at what used to perform well and what has influenced and understanding that. You are looking at what is going to make me money in the future. Now, it does this through, number one is regression analytics. That's kind of the foundation of media mix modeling, or at least traditional media mix modeling, which basically just is a measurement methodology that identifies relationships between marketing inputs and business outcomes. It uses that to develop predictive models, which then allow you to optimize your budget spend. What is it really good at? Predictive. Media mix modeling answers questions like, if I get an extra $100 in marketing, first off, congrats for getting a budget increase, nobody else does. But if I get an extra $100,000 in marketing budget, and I put it in paid search, what incremental pipeline or sales can I expect to return? It does this, now because a media mix model is a statistical model, they're all built differently. Not, two media mix models are never the same. Sometimes you can tell them to optimize for opportunities and pipelines. Sometimes you can tell them to optimize for sales and wins. Some entry-level media mix models basically view marketing performance as a linear thing, whereas more advanced media mix models will actually factor in things like advertising fatigue. They'll factor in the plateaus. So every advertising that you run, it doesn't work like a gumball, where for every extra dollar I spend, I'm going to get the same incremental output from every dollar. It doesn't work like that. Eventually, you hit a plateau where every dollar actually stops adding any more value. Media mix modeling, depending on how sophisticated your model is, can help you identify that plateau and then factor that plateau into its predictive methodologies. Now, we talk about it from a standpoint of predictive. Media mix models are predictive in nature, but they do use historical data. So one of the ways that media mix models are QA'd and validated is by basically running the model against historical performance. And if the model is accurate in saying, oh, well, this is what the historical performance was, and this is our media mix models telling us a very, very similar number, then you know it's pretty accurate, right? So it uses historical data, but it does it to be forward-facing. Investment optimization. This is the gold standard for when your CFO is working with your CMO and trying to say, well, if I give you this much money, what are you going to give me in pipeline or revenue for that investment? It's also the gold standard for a CMO that wants to figure out what the optimal media mix modeling, the optimal marketing mix is to achieve the optimal pipeline or revenue, right? So investment optimization is where media mix modeling really, 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 truly shines. Scenario planning. This is where you get to test out different scenarios and say, okay, well, if I'm going to optimize for pipeline, where should I put my money? Which channel should I put my money in? Or I can optimize for pipeline and say, hey, we're thinking about adding $150 to our trade show budget this year. Is that going to actually do anything for pipeline, or is that not going to do anything for pipeline? You can run different scenarios and test different scenarios using media mix modeling. It's very powerful for that. It really, really does well with that. Now, considerations. Because it is a statistical model, you also have the same sample size restrictions. But the sample size is actually not related to your control groups and your test groups. It's actually related to the amount of money you spend. Because media mix modeling uses your marketing spend as the thing that it's really pivoting off of. It understands when you spent the money, the time lag to pipeline and wins, and so it really cares about when you spend the money. If you're spending $50,000 a year on something, you do not meet the minimum spend threshold. You just don't. What is the minimum spend threshold? It varies. It depends on who you ask. It used to be a lot more than it is now with advanced statistical models and AI. First reference of AI, look at that. Had to get it in. With advancements in the statistical models and AI, those minimum spend thresholds are reducing. But there's still a consideration that you have to take into account. Organizations that are not spending much on marketing, unfortunately, you just can't do media mix modeling because the model doesn't have enough data to make sure that it's going to be accurate enough to make informed decisions. So there is a consideration there. Obviously, advanced statistics are required here. This one is, pretty advanced stuff here when you get into the math. Most organizations that are doing media mix modeling, they either have data scientists in their organization that are creating the model for them, or they're using a software platform that's very expensive that has data scientists that are the ones, fine-tuning the platform. You have to be really, really strong at statistics to do media mix modeling. Also, not only that, but kind of with incrementality testing, you kind of have to, even if you aren't the one that built the model, when you're using it, you kind of have to understand the basics of it to make sure that the output that you're getting is something that you can make informed decisions based off of. Because again, because you have to have a representative sample size, if I'm talking about adding, ooh, I've got 10 grand, where should I put it? Come on, 10 grand's not going to move the needle. Like, you shouldn't even be asking a media mix model about where to put 10 grand. So there's a little bit of you got to have a little bit of understanding and knowledge of how the model works to be good using the model, even if you aren't the one that creates it. So accessibility here is another big thing with media mix modeling. High-level focus. Media mix modeling, again, because of the sample sizes that are required, media mix modeling typically does not get more granular than subchannel level. Subchannel level would be the difference between paid search on AdWords versus paid search on Bing, okay? It can't get more granular than that. You cannot get campaign level, you cannot get keyword level, because the sample sizes are too small. The spend is too small at that granular of a level. So this is high level only. That's why when we talk about the spend optimization, we're not talking about it. You're not going to use media mix modeling to go figure out which trade shows you should be doing next year versus what you did last year. It's not going to do that. It can't do that. It is forward-looking only. Again, it does not tell you historical performance. It uses historical performance to inform the tool. But if you're trying to do something like, hey, let's do a Q3 recap of what we did in Q3 and how it worked, media mix modeling is not going to do that for you because it's forward-facing only, right? And there's that psychological blind spot again. While media mix modeling does a great job of helping you deploy budgets and figure out where you should be spending your money, it does not tell you psychologically why somebody bought. Again, media mix modeling would have that same blind spot that we talked about with incrementality testing for somebody that was a previous customer, or, you know, my brother's your VP of sales. Media mix modeling is not going to be able to factor that in. Now, when we talk about that psychological blind spot of like, you know, former customer or family member or friend is in sales, those things don't happen that frequently. I mean, they happen a lot, but not frequently enough to overwhelm a statistical model. It might cause the statistical model to be 5% less accurate, 10% less accurate, depending on how frequently that happens versus what volume of opportunities and wins we're talking about here, but it may affect it, right? And we also just have to know, I mean, we're being fair about all of these methodologies, so we have to be fair and say that, look, none of them get into the brain of the buyer. They understand the buying mechanisms, the levers, and the advertising, but they do not get into the brain of the buyer and tell us why they bought. Okay, so which methodology is right for you and your organization? Now that you understand all sorts of stuff about these methodologies, which one should you pick? Well, I'm going to let you in on a little bit of secret here. So we've been talking about these three models. Guess who doesn't use any one of the three? My business. Well, true. You're not drinking your own champagne. What are you doing? There's a reason for that, because not every one of these methodologies is right for every organization. And quite frankly, my organization isn't right for any of these. Want to know why? We have 7 people in my organization. I do all of our sales. I'm involved in every marketing campaign that we do. I don't need complex data to tell me what's working and what's not working, because I already know, because I'm that heavily involved. Now, if we were a 1,000-person business, I'm no longer involved in every deal. I'm certainly no longer involved in all the marketing campaigns. We need more complex data. So the point here is the sophistication of your marketing measurement methodology that you choose should be aligned with the maturity and sophistication of your business. If you're an organization that's spending $150,000 a year on marketing as your total budget, I can promise you, you do not need incrementality testing. You do not need media mix modeling. You probably don't even need multi-touch attribution. Single touch is probably just fine for you. If you have super simple buying behaviors, like one click to buy, you don't need multi-touch. You might benefit from incrementality or media mix modeling, depending on your marketing budgets. Like, I mean, people buy shoes one click to buy, and companies like Nike, oh, they're using incrementality testing and media mix modeling. They're using everything. But they're probably not using multi-touch attribution, because buying shoes isn't a considered purchase. You're not spending weeks and months trying to figure out which shoe you should buy. You buy the shoes, right? So the methodology you pick should fit your company's needs. And so that's why every time somebody comes up to me and says, Drew, which one of these 3 should I be using? I don't know. I got to learn so much more about your business to help you identify which one of these 3 you should be using. And if I tell you without knowing anything about your business, I'm full of shit. So that's kind of the big takeaway from this, is you cannot just pick one of these willy-nilly. It has to match your organization and be the right fit for your organization. I know tons of organizations that would love to be able to do predictive modeling with media mix modeling. You don't have the spend. You just don't. So it's unfortunate, but that's just how it goes. So before we get into the next section of this, which is a little bit of a framework for how to figure out which one's right for your organization, questions, comments, concerns, emotional outbursts. Yes?
So because you obviously can't do a quantitative approach, are you doing a qualitative approach inside your own company?
So we do, yes, so we do qualitative approach because I talk to every buyer. And so for me, I always ask them the most simple question that everybody should be asking in a buying situation: how'd you hear about us? Right? That is the most important question any sales rep or SDR can ask to get some sort of qualitative data around that. But you can also ask other questions through the buying process, like when they finally win the deal. Yeah, hey, why'd you guys buy from us? Like, what made you guys decide to go with us? Most orgs don't bother asking that question. You should be, and it's super easy to do. What's that?
They're too afraid. They don't want to ruin the deal.
Yeah, they don't want to ruin the deal. Yeah, they just want to rush to the celebration of that we won, right? There's other qualitative methods that you can use as well. We don't use this because, again, we're too small. But it's the old post-purchase survey, right? Everybody in B2C does a post-purchase survey, and most of us ignore it, but a lot of people still fill that out. In B2B, post-purchase surveys, way more rare than in B2C. But I would say that the data that you would get from a post-purchase survey is probably more valuable in B2B than in B2C. I definitely owe you for this question because we are actually on the verge of launching a service offering for essentially it's a post-purchase survey, but it's a little bit larger and bigger than that because it includes like the analysis and automation and stuff like that. But we'll be launching a service offering for that. But yeah, really post-purchase survey is the most beneficial way of trying to get the qualitative information outside of just the where'd you hear about us and why'd you buy? Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir.
When you're talking multi-touch and choosing like the right attribution model, are you just looking at beginning to end or from milestone to milestone? So for like EQL to SQL, are you that granular in it and changing your attribution models based off of it, or is it you're talking to these leaders and you want a high-level attribution report versus talking to the managers and you need more granular?
Yeah, it's the latter. Your audience is going to determine which models you're using because they're going to ask different questions, right? So, a manager, a marketing manager, somebody that's actually like designing campaigns, they're going to have much more granular questions than a CMO, right? They're going to get into campaign level information. CMOs are most likely going to stay at the channel and sub-channel level, right? Now, with attribution models, if you're building your own multi-touch attribution system, obviously you have total control of the attribution models and how they work, right? If you buy a multi-touch attribution platform, they come with out-of-the-box models, and then they also have the ability to create a custom model or a couple of custom models. Now, one of the things that you can do with these models is, for example, and we're going to use the Marketo Measure version just because it's the one that we work in most frequently. But the Marketo Measure models, you've got this is the full path model here, right? It goes all the way from first touch to closed. Well, you've got your W-shaped model, which goes like this, that stops once the opportunity's been created. I don't need a custom model. If I want to figure out everything that's happening from opportunity creation to opportunity closure, I do not need a custom model to do that. Because what I can do is I can say, hey, I want to look for people that have a touch point in the full path model, but do not have a touch point in the W-shaped model, which means that's going to isolate this section right in here, right? So you can stack attribution models because they're not just, you pick one and that's the one you have. You have access to them at all times. So you can stack attribution models to be inclusive or exclusive. So I'm going to include the full path. I'm going to exclude the W-shaped. That leaves me this remainder here. So you can do that depending on the models that you have at your disposal. You can do that to isolate specific parts of the funnel. Or depending on what you're really trying to get at, you can use your custom model to isolate specific parts of the funnel. Because you might have a marketing manager that's going to say, hey, I want to understand all the marketing that's helping people go from MQL to opportunity creation. Because that's an important part of our funnel from a marketing perspective, right? Because MQLs are great, but MQLs don't pay the bills. So we got to figure out what's getting MQLs to pipeline. So we're going to isolate that section of the funnel and see what marketing's helping there. When we build reports and dashboards, we do not build reports and dashboards to try to answer every question that somebody's ever going to ask. We build hyper-focused reports and dashboards that answer very, very narrow questions that are designed so that when you answer the question, you can quickly either get to the action or the next question that will get me to the action. So what I mean by that, I know that that's really vague. So what I mean by that is you start with a high-level question, right? That is, for the opportunities that were created in Q3, how did marketing influence those opportunities? So right there, we're talking W-shaped model, because we want to stop once the opportunity's been created, and we're looking at opportunities created last quarter in Q3, right? Now, we're going to find out how those opportunities were influenced by marketing. Which channels, which sub-channels, which campaigns. Is that going to lead me to any kind of action? Absolutely not. It's too broad. Because we don't understand, if anything doesn't show up, we don't understand the why, and if things are showing up, we still don't understand the why, right? So we got to do more deep dives. So you have to keep asking more questions. So reports, we don't, like when we do like a quarterly reporting breakdown for a client, which we do these all the time, or a monthly breakdown, we have basically a deck that's probably, the one I'm doing right now is probably 40 slides. And each slide is a report that answers a different question, right? And those 40 slides are the same 40 slides we do every month and every quarter. And they progress throughout different things, and they tell a cohesive story about what happened with marketing in that quarter or that month. Not one of those slides is diagnostic enough to take action. You always have to do deep dives after the high level to get down to where the action happens, where the insight is. So it's not a consistency problem, because the consistency is I've got my 40 boards, my 40 slides, and we do that every single quarter or every single month, and it's the same thing with the same attribution model. If I use if I use the W-shaped on slide 15, well, the next month or the next quarter, I'm using the W-shaped model on slide 15, right? So that's part's consistent. What's inconsistent that we just have to expect is that for this month, my deep dive might be into trade shows because I saw bad results in trade shows. The next month, my deep dive might be into why did organic search drop 30% month over month, right? And that, when I do that, then my diagnostics, I might use 3 or 4 different attribution models just to understand why organic search has dropped 30% month over month or quarter over quarter. So the consistency is at the high level. The inconsistency is at that diagnostic ground level where we're trying to figure out why things are happening. And you can't plan for that because you don't know that organic search dropped 30% month over month or quarter over quarter. You just have to know when you see it, I got to go investigate it. So the question is about how to factor in the impacts of the market effect. And let's give a really, really concrete example. Who here is aware of what happened with Drift a month ago? Yeah. So Drift obviously had a massive problem, right? That's going to cause havoc for SalesLoft and their marketing. Who's going to win from that? Qualified, Intercom, a few others, Chili Piper. They're going to win from that, right? Did they do anything to cause this increase of pipeline that they're going to have? Well, from a market effect standpoint, no. But from a marketing standpoint, they may have jumped on that and said, hey, if you saw what happened with Drift and you need to switch from Drift. This is actually Alina from Chili Piper did this. She posted this on LinkedIn. She said, if you're a victim of the Drift issue and you want to switch to Chili Piper, we'll actually do your migration for free. Now, they got the marketing effect, and they did the marketing to benefit from the market effect. Here's how this works. From an attribution standpoint, it's almost impossible to factor in marketing effect because it's not a touch point, right? So you as an analyst or whoever's doing the analysis is going to be the one that's going to have to manually factor in the market effect, which is going to be imprecise. Incrementality testing would not necessarily be able to factor in the marketing effect unless you design an experiment specifically for that effect. So for example, you could run an experiment where you say, okay, we are going to target, we're going to go get technographic profile information for anybody that has Drift on their website. And for the people that have Drift on their website, we are going to market to them a free migration. People that don't have Drift on their website are not going to get that ad. And we're going to test the lift for the people that have drift and the people that don't have drift. The people that are getting that advertising, the people that are not getting that advertising. You're not really testing the market effect. You're testing the effectiveness of the advertising that capitalizes on the market effect, right? So for incrementality testing, that market effect would be very difficult. Media mix modeling, because it is strictly a statistical model, you can add all sorts of things into your statistical model. As a matter of fact, really, really advanced and really, really mature, good media mix models factor in external market effects. So if a recession happens, and the recession is predicted to reduce the GDP by 2.5% quarter over quarter, or it's supposed to specifically impact a specific sector of the industry, right? You can add that into your media mix model so that that's factored into our results. Well, normally our results would do this, but because of the recession effect, they're actually going to do this, right? So you can add that into your media mix model because it's just a statistical model. You can add anything in there you want, right? So market effect is one of the most difficult things to factor in when you're doing analysis. You either have to factor it in manually or you have to have a media mix model, which is still you're factoring it in to the model manually, right? So yeah, market effects are so difficult to manage. Yeah. And that's the thing is like, you know, you look at like, I mean, COVID. It's one of the biggest market effects that has ever happened in the last 100 years, right? I mean, trade shows, in the dumpster, right? Platforms like Zoom, skyrocket, right? How do you factor that in? One, I mean, you can't predict that there's going to be a massive pandemic, and here's how this is going to happen. How do you factor that into growth plans and things like that? I mean, I know organizations that benefited greatly from COVID that have not adjusted any of their financial models post-COVID to factor out like, hey, we got this massive boost from COVID. That is not sustainable. We are going to plateau. No, we just expect to grow year over year by 20% every year, you know, because of the COVID effect. No, that's not how this works. So there's a lot of organizations that just don't factor in market effects, either as the market effect is happening or years after the market effect happened. And it's difficult to do. It really is. That's why CFOs are supposed to make the big bucks. Great question, though. Any other questions? What do we got? Yes?
Mine is more related to last touch, and I guess a little bit of multi-touch. What is your response to the great debate over whether marketing and sales are giving over credit or marketing and marketing ops are giving over credit? Like what, I guess it's a it depends answer, but I find myself constantly in that.
Oh, it's not an it depends answer. I hate the competitive. Do not ever get into a competitive situation with your reporting where you're trying to get into these battles between marketing versus sales or marketing versus SDRs. It is a losing proposition for the organization. And most of the time when these battles happen between marketing and sales wins. Because sales is the ones closing the deals. So marketing is going to lose those battles 99.9% of the time. Even though marketing has way better data than sales, because sales couldn't give a shit about data most of the time. They don't care. Even though marketing has way better data, marketing loses those battles way more often than they win. So when we do, whether it's single touch or multi-touch or incrementality testing or media mix modeling, we always try to phrase things in ways that avoid these competitive behaviors. Because we do not want to create a scoreboard. We just don't. Because ultimately, once you start creating a scoreboard, then the goal for marketing and the goal for sales is no longer revenue. It's to increase my number on the scoreboard. And that can get really, really bad. And I'll give you an example of this. This isn't actually even marketing versus sales. This is departmental competition within marketing.
That's what I
So we implemented Marketo Measure for a customer. And they got done, and it was time to use the tool and use the data. And they gave free rein access to the marketing department to use the data as they saw fit, to figure out what they should be doing to be better at marketing. Personally, that goes against my beliefs. I believe that a centralized reporting and analysis function is better because it removes bias from the analysis. They disagreed with me on that, and they just did this. What happened is their field marketing team became a problem because their field marketing team looked at the attribution model, and they said, well, in the U-shaped model, Marketo Measure U-shaped model, let's use a different color here so we can differentiate. In the U-shaped model, which goes like that, which only factors in first touch and lead creation, it does a 50-50 split between first touch and lead creation. And using any model, that is the largest share of an opportunity that you can get. Also, with the W-shaped model, and again, this is specific to Marketo Measure. All the other attribution platforms do things differently. They all have different percentages and models and stuff like that. One's not right, one's not wrong. It's just using this one as an example. 30% goes to first touch, 30% goes to lead creation, and 30% goes to opportunity creation. And then all these guys down here, they split the remaining 10%. So what happens is this. The field marketing team says, OK, look, we, as the field marketing team, get the highest percentage of the pies, the opportunity pies, if we are the first touch or the lead creation, ideally both, for the people that we bring to our events. So what are we going to do? We're going to stop inviting people that are in our database to come to our field marketing events. And we are only going to try to generate net new people through our field marketing events. Now, they did this solely by looking at the percentages that were available to them. How much of this scoreboard can I put up on my scoreboard? How many points can I get on my scoreboard? How do I optimize that? They didn't even look at historical performance. So when I found this out, I said, hey, let's take a look. Let's compare the first touch model, the lead creation model, the U-shaped model, and the W-shaped model specifically for field events. And let's see which one is actually historically the highest performing model for field marketing. It was the W-shaped model by a mile, which means that they get their greatest share of opportunities when the person is already in the database versus a net new person. And we all know marketing to people that are in our database is free. Marketing to people that are not in our database usually costs money. So not only were you getting a higher percent of the share for the people that were already in your database, it's free. It's more efficient from a dollars and cents standpoint. So if they had made this decision and moved forward with that, they would have, it's the cutting off your nose to spite your face thing, right? They would have reduced the overall amount of opportunities and wins that they were influencing by trying to maximize their share, by trying to maximize their percentage. It would have been a net negative for the business, while it would have been a net positive for this department. So we do not like that stuff. We don't. We have a podcast, and I was interviewing the CMO from, used to be called Affinipay, now called 8 a.m. And their CMO was saying that their analysis function as actually sits outside of marketing and sits outside of sales. It is its own dedicated function within the organization that rolls up under operations. And not rev ops, like business ops, right? And that's because they want that function to be as unbiased as possible, not get into any kind of competitive stuff, no scoreboards at all. And they can do that because, their leader isn't in sales or marketing. So like they don't care. They care about the business. They don't care about a specific department or propping up a specific department. And to me, that is ultimately the ideal way to do measurement and analysis. Because otherwise, that bias just kicks in. Yeah. I was at an organization at one point in time, and they had somebody else doing their analysis for them. And that person left the organization, and I basically picked up all of their analysis. Oh, and we were just about to get kicked out. Wow. So we started doing I started doing all their analysis. I found all their numbers were made up to make the marketing department look good.
My words started to go that way. I was like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Valuable things are happening. I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. We went long. Thank you, everybody. I do have, so one, we will make this deck available to everybody. There's also a worksheet that is designed to help you understand which one of these methodologies or multiple methodologies might be right for you. So feel free to, I'll make sure that worksheet gets out to you all as well. And then if you have any questions, concerns, or anything that you'd like to discuss, I'm going to be here the whole time. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.